expect that, I can tell you. Thank you, Jim. Those were incredibly kind and generous words, and I really, really appreciate them, and I appreciate your acknowledgement. Where were you when I needed you? Those few words changed the course of my life. They were shouted as an accusation towards the Bay Area gay and lesbian educators as they bravely marched in the San Francisco Pride Parade of 1996, 20 years ago. Standing next to me and my husband was a young gay man who hurled those fateful words at all the teachers who had failed him during his time at school. Teachers who had ignored this queer youth's invisibility, a frightened kid hiding silently in their classrooms. He needed their affirmation and support. He received neither. His words shook me to the core. They nagged at me like a toothache through the remainder of that summer. When school recommenced in September, I was faced with a very difficult choice. I could remain silent and closeted for the remainder of my career, doing nothing to acknowledge and support queer students in my classroom. Or I could choose, in whatever way within my means, to bring about change in the education system in which queer kids, teachers, and families would be safe, welcome, and accepted. In the end, there really was no choice. I began locally in my district of Coquitlam by asking the board to establish an ad hoc committee to ascertain whether queer students were safe in our schools, and if not, what could be done to support them. Needless to say, the response from the board was less than enthusiastic. Luckily, however, I had the full support of my local, and the conversation began. Soon, my involvement in GALE BC, the Gay and Lesbian Educators, provided an opportunity to bring about change on a wider scale. A small group of queer colleagues and I worked successfully to bring, simultaneously from our individual locals, a resolution to the BCTF AGM calling on the Federation to establish a program to bring about the elimination of homophobia and heterosexism in the BC public school system. What followed was nothing short of a whirlwind of controversy none of us ever expected. A media frenzy ensued that placed the Federation's AGM front and center in nightly newscasts for days on end. Forces for and against the resolution began to coalesce, pitting teachers against teachers, parents against parents, and students against students. By the Saturday morning that the resolution was to be debated and voted on, a huge rally had gathered on the streets outside this hotel. Emotions ran very high on both sides, and police stood by to ensure the safety of all was maintained. GALE BC was simply a group of queer educators wanting to bring about change in the Federation, in which we had no official status. However, the Feminist Caucus did have a formal presence, and it was to those brave and dedicated forerunners that we turned to for support for the resolution. Their lobbying on our behalf made a huge difference in the support we received from locals across the province. In the end, the resolution passed, and the rest, as they say, is history. The decade that followed saw significant developments in the Federation's programs, a Supreme Court of Canada victory in the Surrey School Board book banning case, a BC human rights settlement that brought about major curriculum change at the ministry level, and finally, the legalization of same-sex marriage. But most importantly, the presence of queer students, teachers, and families in the BC education system became so visible that going back into the closet was no longer an option. Support from so many wonderful colleagues, friends, and most importantly, my late husband of 38 years, has made it possible for me to stand here today to receive an honor that I gratefully share with each and every one of them. And perhaps in some small way, what has happened to change hearts and minds in education and in society at large will help to assuage the anger and disappointment of that young man in San Francisco all those years ago. To him I say, thank you for your shouting your anger and disappointment. I heard you, I listened, and I tried to make it better. Thank you.